The world thought they knew everything about the British royal family. Tabloids had dissected every public appearance, every gesture, every carefully orchestrated moment. But on a crisp October morning in 2024, when the golden doors of Buckingham Palace swung open, what emerged would shatter every assumption the world had ever made about Kate Middleton and Prince William. This wasn't just another royal engagement. This wasn't another carefully planned photo opportunity. What happened that day would rewrite the very foundation of the modern monarchy, challenge centuries of tradition, and reveal a love story so powerful it would move mountains and kingdoms. The crowds gathered outside had no idea they were about to witness history in the making. The photographers positioned their cameras for what they assumed would be routine royal coverage. The world's media prepared for another predictable royal story. They were all wrong. What they captured instead was the moment everything changed. The moment when two people who had spent their entire lives preparing for duty discovered something far more powerful than obligation. The moment when the future of the British crown took a turn that no constitutional expert, royal historian, or palace insider had ever imagined possible. This is the true story of how Kate Middleton and Prince William shocked the world, not just with their first appearance as king and queen, but with a decision so bold, so unexpected, so utterly transformative that it would echo through history forever. Some called it scandalous. Others called it revolutionary. But for Kate and William, it was simply the moment they chose love over everything else, including the crown itself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Buckingham Palace as Kate Middleton stood before the ornate mirror in what would become her final hour as the Duchess of Cambridge. Her reflection stared back with eyes that held secrets the world was about to discover. The weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders like the heavy velvet robes she would never wear. 24 hours earlier, everything had been different. The carefully orchestrated life she had known for over a decade was still intact. The schedules, the protocols, the endless stream of royal duties that had defined her existence since marrying William, all of it had seemed permanent, unchangeable, as solid as the stones of Windsor Castle itself. But sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest moments. For Kate, it started with a letter. The envelope had arrived through unofficial channels, delivered by a courier who disappeared as quickly as he had appeared. Inside, handwritten on paper that bore no official seal or royal crest, were words that would change everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, and her future. The letter was from William, but not the William the world knew. Not the dutiful heir who waved from balconies and cut ribbons at charity events. This was the man she had fallen in love with at university, before the weight of destiny had settled on his shoulders like an invisible crown. The man who had once dreamed of flying helicopters forever, of making a difference in ways that didn't require photographers and protocols. Kate. The letter began in his familiar handwriting. I can't pretend anymore. We can't pretend anymore. What we're about to do will shock the world, but it's the only way we can be true to ourselves and to each other. Meet me at the place where we first knew we belonged together. The place he referenced wasn't a palace or a castle. It was a small cottage in the Cotswolds where they had spent their first weekend alone together, years before the engagement, before the wedding, before the children, before the crushing weight of royal expectations had transformed them from two young people in love into symbols of duty and tradition. As Kate folded the letter and placed it in her handbag, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a flutter of excitement mixed with terror. It was the same feeling she'd had before their first kiss, before he proposed, before she walked down the aisle at Westminster Abbey. It was the feeling of standing on the edge of the unknown, knowing that once she stepped forward, there would be no going back. Her phone buzzed with the familiar sound of palace communications. 3 more official engagements confirmed for the following week. A state dinner requiring her presence. A charity gala where she would smile and wave and say all the right things to all the right people. The endless machine of royal duty rolling forward, expecting her to be the perfect cog in its mechanism. But as she looked out the window at the London skyline, Kate realized she was done being perfect, done being what everyone else expected her to be. Done living a life that looked magnificent from the outside, but felt increasingly hollow from within. The irony wasn't lost on her. In just a few hours, she and William were scheduled to make their first official appearance as the newly crowned king and queen. The previous week had been a whirlwind of ceremony and pageantry, of ancient rituals that had played out exactly as they had for centuries. The world had watched as William accepted the crown, and Kate took her place beside him. It had all been so predictable, so perfectly choreographed, so utterly royal. What the world didn't know was that the coronation had been William's idea, not because he wanted the power, but because he needed the platform for what came next. Sometimes, he had told her in quiet moments when the palace was asleep, and they could speak freely. The only way to break free from a system is to reach its very pinnacle first. Kate's lady-in-waiting knocked softly on the door. "Your Majesty, the car will be ready in 30 minutes. Your Majesty." The title still felt strange, like wearing someone else's clothes. Kate had spent years being called Your Royal Highness, and had finally grown comfortable with it. Now she was supposed to be Your Majesty, the Queen of England, the woman who would stand beside William as he ruled one of the world's oldest monarchies. Except that wasn't what was going to happen at all. She made her way through the palace corridors she had walked thousands of times, past portraits of queens who had come before her. Elizabeth II, who had dedicated her entire life to duty. Victoria, who had mourned her beloved Albert for 40 years. And Mary, Elizabeth I, women who had sacrificed everything for the crown. But, as Kate passed their painted faces, she felt something different than the reverence she usually experienced. Instead of inspiration, she felt sadness. These women had been trapped in their roles just as she was trapped in hers. They had been symbols before they were human beings, queens before they were women. The thought that stopped her in her tracks was simple, but revolutionary. What if it didn't have to be that way? Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't palace communications. It was a text from William. "Are you ready to change the world?" She typed back with fingers that trembled slightly. "I'm ready to change our world." The distinction mattered. The world would have to take care of itself. Today was about them, about Kate and William, not the Queen and King, not the Duke and Duchess, not the symbols and figureheads they had become. Today was about two people who had found each other in university and had somehow managed to stay connected despite everything that had tried to pull them apart. As she made her way to the car that would take her to what everyone believed would be a routine royal engagement, Kate felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of expectation, the burden of always being perfect, the exhaustion of living someone else's dream, all of it was about to lift from her shoulders. She thought about her children and felt a pang of something between guilt and hope. George, Charlotte, and Louis would grow up in a different world than the one she had inherited. They would have choices she had never had. They would know that love mattered more than duty, that authenticity mattered more than tradition, that being true to yourself mattered more than being what everyone else expected you to be. The car pulled up outside the palace. Through the tinted windows, she could see the crowds already gathering. They had come to see their new queen, to witness history, to be part of something they thought they understood. They had no idea that history was indeed about to be made, just not in the way any of them expected. Kate settled into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, the same car that had carried her to her wedding, to countless royal engagements, to moments of joy and duty and everything in between. Today it would carry her to freedom. As the car pulled away from Buckingham Palace, Kate looked back at the building that had been both her home and her prison for over a decade. The morning light caught the windows, making them gleam like the crown jewels locked away in the Tower of London. Beautiful, valuable, historic, and completely out of reach for ordinary people, just like the life she was leaving behind. The London streets blurred past the window as they made their way toward what the world thought would be a simple royal engagement. Kate's heart raced as she thought about what was really going to happen. In less than an hour, she and William would stand before the crowds, before the cameras, before the entire world, and they would do something that no British royal had ever done before. They would tell the truth. The truth about what their marriage had really been like under the microscope of constant scrutiny. The truth about the pressure, the isolation, the way their children were being groomed for a life they might not want. The truth about how love could survive anything, even the weight of a crown. Most shocking of all, they would reveal the decision they had made together, in private, away from advisors and constitutional experts and everyone who had opinions about what they should do with their lives. Kate closed her eyes and let herself imagine, for just a moment, what life would be like after today. She saw quiet mornings without official schedules. She saw William teaching their children to fly kites, without photographers capturing every moment. She saw herself choosing her own clothes, her own causes, her own path forward. She saw freedom. The car began to slow, and Kate opened her eyes to see the crowds pressed against the barriers. Signs and flags waved in the morning breeze. People had been waiting for hours to catch a glimpse of their new queen. Children sat on their father's shoulders, hoping to see the fairy tale princess they had read about in storybooks. Kate's heart ached for them, because she was about to shatter their fairy tale. But maybe, she thought, what they would get instead would be something even better than a fairy tale. Maybe they would get something real. The car stopped. Through the window, she could see William standing at the podium that had been set up for their first joint address as king and queen. He looked calm, confident, every inch the monarch he had been born to be. But Kate could see the slight tension in his shoulders, the way he held his head just a little too high. She knew him well enough to recognize that he was nervous too. Her door opened, and the roar of the crowd washed over her like a wave. Camera flashes exploded in a symphony of light. The familiar chant of "Long Live the Queen" began to ripple through the gathered thousands. Kate stepped out of the car, and, for the last time in her life, she waved the royal wave she had perfected over the years of training. She smiled the smile that had graced 1,000 magazine covers. She walked the walk that had carried her through countless official engagements. But, inside her head, she was already somewhere else entirely. She was already free. As Kate approached the podium where William stood waiting, the crowd's excitement reached a fever pitch. Thousands of people pressed against the barriers, their faces glowing with the kind of joy usually reserved for the most special occasions. They had come to witness their new monarchs, to be part of what they believed would be a celebration of tradition and continuity. The media section buzzed with activity as reporters from around the world positioned themselves for the perfect shot. This was supposed to be a routine royal engagement, but the fact that it was their first joint appearance as king and queen made every moment newsworthy. Camera crews from the BBC, CNN, and dozens of international networks had their equipment trained on the royal couple. Sarah Henderson from the Royal Press Corps checked her notes one final time. She had been covering the royal family for 15 years, and she prided herself on being able to predict exactly what would happen at these events. The king would speak about duty and service. The queen would smile gracefully and perhaps say a few words about her commitment to charitable causes. They would wave, pose for photos, perhaps greet a few selected members of the crowd, and then retreat to their car for the journey back to the palace. But as Sarah watched through her telephoto lens, something seemed different. There was an energy between William and Kate that she hadn't seen in years. They seemed more connected somehow, more present. Usually, at official engagements, they performed their roles with practiced perfection, but there was often a distance between them, the careful spacing of two people who knew they were being watched. Today, they stood closer together. Today, William's hand brushed Kate's arm in a gesture that seemed spontaneous rather than choreographed. Today, Kate's smile reached her eyes in a way that reminded Sarah of the young woman who had walked down the aisle at Westminster Abbey more than a decade ago. "Something's different," Sarah murmured to her cameraman, who had worked with her long enough to trust her instincts. "Different how? I don't know yet. But watch them. Really watch them." In the VIP section, Prime Minister James Morrison waited with other government officials and dignitaries. He had been briefed on the general outline of the event, but, like everyone else, he expected nothing more than ceremonial remarks and photo opportunities. The relationship between the monarchy and the government had been smooth during William's brief reign so far, and Morrison had no reason to expect anything other than continued cooperation. Lady Margaret Ashford, the Queen's private secretary, stood near the back of the platform with a clipboard full of carefully planned logistics. Every royal event was choreographed down to the minute, and this one was no exception. The king would speak for exactly 7 minutes. The queen would add remarks for 3 minutes. They would then spend 12 minutes greeting selected members of the crowd. The entire event would last precisely 22 minutes, ending at 11:47 a.m. so they could return to the palace for lunch with the Archbishop of Canterbury. But, as Lady Margaret watched her employers take their positions at the podium, she noticed something that made her stomach flutter with unease. Neither of them had their prepared remarks. The speeches she had spent weeks crafting, reviewing with constitutional experts, and approving through proper channels were nowhere to be seen. "Where are their speech cards?" she whispered urgently to an aide. "I don't know, ma'am. They said they wouldn't need them today." Lady Margaret's 25 years of experience in royal protocol had taught her that royals never, ever appeared in public without prepared remarks. Even the most experienced members of the family carried notes for the simplest events. The idea that the king and queen would wing it at their first major engagement was absolutely unthinkable. Meanwhile, in the crowd, 8-year-old Emma Thompson tugged on her grandmother's coat. Emma had convinced her entire family to wake up at dawn and travel into London for a chance to see the new queen. She had practiced her curtsy for weeks, hoping against hope that she might be selected to present flowers. Gran, when will the queen talk to us? Soon, darling. Any minute now. Emma had spent months learning everything she could about Kate Middleton. She knew about the charities the queen supported, about her love of photography, about how she had met Prince William at university. In Emma's 8-year-old mind, Kate represented everything magical about being a princess. The beautiful dresses, the royal jewels, the fairy tale life. What Emma couldn't know was that the woman standing just 50 feet away was about to destroy every fairy tale notion she had ever had about royal life. William stepped forward to the microphone, and the crowd fell silent with an expectancy that was almost tangible. This was it. The moment their new king would address them for the first time as a reigning monarch, with his queen beside him. My fellow citizens, William began, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered thousands. Kate, and I asked you to come here today because we have something important to share with you. Something that will surprise you, possibly shock you, and, hopefully, in time, inspire you. In the press section, Sarah Henderson's experienced journalist instincts began to tingle. This wasn't the opening of a standard royal speech. Where was the formal language? Where were the references to duty and service? Where was the careful, measured tone that royal training had drilled into every member of the family? For the past week, William continued, you have watched as I was crowned king, and Kate became your queen. You witnessed ceremonies that have taken place for centuries, traditions that connect us to 1,000 years of history. And all of that was real and meaningful and important. The crowd hung on every word. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. Something about William's tone commanded attention in a way that formal royal speeches rarely did. But what you witnessed was also, in many ways, a performance. A beautiful, historic performance, but a performance nonetheless. Today, Kate, and I want to step out of that performance and speak to you as human beings, not as symbols. We want to tell you the truth about our lives, our marriage, and our future. In the VIP section, Prime Minister Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was happening here had not been cleared through proper government channels. Constitutional crises didn't usually announce themselves with such clarity, but Morrison's political instincts told him he was watching one unfold in real time. Lady Margaret Ashford had gone pale. In all her years of royal service, she had never heard a member of the family speak so candidly in public. The words performance and truth were not part of the approved royal vocabulary. These were concepts that implied the existence of a private reality different from the public image, exactly the kind of revelation that royal protocol existed to prevent. Kate stepped forward and joined William at the microphone. When she spoke, her voice was warm but firm, carrying an authenticity that royal training usually polished away. We fell in love at university, she said simply. Two young people who found each other in a world that seemed full of possibilities. We dreamed together, planned together, built a life together. And when we married, we thought we could maintain that connection while also serving the country we love. She paused, and in that silence, the crowd sensed that they were about to hear something unprecedented. For 13 years, we have tried to be the king and queen you expected us to be. We have followed protocols, maintained traditions, and lived our lives in service to the crown. We have raised our children to understand their place in the line of succession. We have sacrificed our privacy, our spontaneity, and often our authentic selves for the good of the monarchy. Sarah Henderson was frantically typing notes on her phone while simultaneously trying to process what she was hearing. This was either the most honest royal speech in modern history or the beginning of the end of the British monarchy as they knew it. But somewhere along the way, Kate continued, we realized that we were losing each other. The roles we were playing, even though we played them with sincere dedication, were slowly erasing the people we actually are. We were becoming symbols instead of human beings, figureheads instead of partners. The crowd was absolutely silent now. Even the traffic noise from the surrounding streets seemed to have faded away. Thousands of people stood transfixed, sensing that they were witnessing something historic, something that would be remembered and discussed for generations. William took Kate's hand, a gesture so natural and spontaneous that it seemed shocking in its simplicity. Royal couples didn't hold hands during official engagements. They maintained proper spacing, proper posture, proper distance. But here they were, fingers intertwined like any married couple sharing a difficult conversation. So we made a decision, William said. A decision that will disappoint some of you, anger others, and hopefully inspire a few. We decided that love matters more than duty, that authenticity matters more than tradition, that being true to ourselves and to each other matters more than being what everyone else expects us to be. In the crowd, Emma Thompson looked up at her grandmother with confused eyes. "Gran, what's the king saying? I don't understand." Her grandmother didn't answer because she didn't understand either. None of them did. They had come expecting pageantry and gotten honesty instead. They had come for a fairy tale and were getting reality. The camera crews continued filming, but the operators behind the cameras were as stunned as everyone else. This wasn't the footage they had expected to capture. This wasn't the story they had come to tell. But it was the story that was unfolding before them, and they had no choice but to document it. "We want you to know," Kate said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "that this decision wasn't made lightly. We have spent months discussing it, weighing the consequences, considering our children and your expectations and the future of the monarchy itself. But, in the end," William added, "we realized that we couldn't continue living a lie. We couldn't keep pretending that our royal roles hadn't come between us. We couldn't keep raising our children to believe that duty matters more than happiness, that tradition matters more than truth." The implications of what they were saying began to dawn on the crowd slowly, like sunrise creeping across a landscape. This wasn't just a speech about their marriage. This wasn't just an unusually personal royal address. This was something much bigger, much more revolutionary. This was the sound of a crown falling. Prime Minister Morrison pulled out his phone and began frantically typing messages to his staff. Constitutional lawyers would need to be consulted immediately. Parliament would need to be briefed. The implications of what appeared to be happening were staggering and would require immediate government response. But even as Morrison dealt with the political ramifications, part of him couldn't help but admire the courage of what William and Kate were doing. In an age of political calculation and careful messaging, here were two people choosing radical honesty over comfortable deception. Lady Margaret Ashford was no longer thinking about protocol or logistics or the carefully planned schedule that was now completely meaningless. She was thinking about the young woman she had watched grow from a nervous university graduate into a poised royal, and she realized that Kate had never looked more like herself than she did at this moment. The crowd waited, suspended in the tension between what they had expected and what they were receiving. Some looked confused, others excited, still others concerned. But all of them recognized that they were witnessing something that would change their understanding of the royal family forever. And William and Kate stood together at the podium, hands clasped, hearts open, ready to finish what they had started. The silence stretched across the crowd like a held breath. In that suspended moment, William and Kate exchanged a look that spoke of years of private conversations, midnight planning sessions, and the kind of love that had survived the impossible pressure of royal life. They had reached the point of no return, and they both knew it. Kate squeezed William's hand and stepped closer to the microphone. When she spoke again, her voice carried the warmth of a mother explaining something important to her children. "We know that many of you have followed our story from the beginning. You watched us fall in love as university students. You celebrated our engagement and our wedding. You welcomed our children and shared in our joys. You have been part of our journey in ways that most couples never experience." In the crowd, Margaret Davidson, a retired teacher from Yorkshire, felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. She had indeed followed their entire story. She had a scrapbook at home filled with newspaper clippings and magazine articles documenting every major moment in their relationship. Like millions of others, she had invested emotionally in their fairy tale romance. "Because you have been with us from the beginning," Kate continued, "we feel we owe you the truth about where our journey has led us. And the truth is that we can no longer be the king and queen that the institution requires us to be while remaining the husband and wife, the father and mother, the human beings that we need to be." The words hung in the air like smoke from a cannon blast. Even the most astute royal watchers in the press section hadn't seen this coming. Sarah Henderson found herself holding her breath, waiting for what came next. William took over, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When my grandmother passed away, I accepted the crown because it was my duty. I was prepared to sacrifice my personal happiness for the good of the country, just as she had done for 70 years. But Kate helped me realize that sacrifice and service don't have to be the same thing." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. "We can serve our country and our people without sacrificing our souls. We can make a difference without wearing crowns." We can lead without sitting on thrones. In the VIP section, Archbishop Michael Lawson felt his world tilting on its axis. He had personally placed the crown on William's head just 1 week ago. The coronation had been one of the most moving ceremonies he had ever performed, a sacred ritual connecting the new king to centuries of divine appointment. Now that sacred bond was being casually dissolved in front of television cameras. The archbishop thought about the constitutional crisis that was unfolding before his eyes. The monarchy was the foundation of the British political system. Parliament governed in the name of the crown. The Church of England existed with the monarch as its head. What William and Kate were describing wasn't just a personal decision. It was the potential unraveling of the entire constitutional framework. But, as he watched the couple at the podium, the archbishop couldn't deny the profound love and authenticity radiating from them. In 30 years of ministry, he had counseled hundreds of couples through marriage difficulties. He recognized the signs of a relationship that had found its way back to its core after nearly losing itself in external pressures. "We want to be clear about what this means," Kate said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "We are not abandoning our responsibilities to our children or to the country. We are not walking away from service or from the causes we care about. But we are choosing to redefine what service looks like for our family." William nodded and continued their carefully orchestrated revelation. "The crown will pass to the next in line, as it always has throughout history. The monarchy will continue, but it will continue without us. We are choosing love over duty, family over institution, truth over tradition." In the crowd, reactions were beginning to ripple through the gathered thousands like waves hitting a shoreline. Some people looked stunned, others confused, still others strangely relieved. Emma Thompson, the 8-year-old who had dreamed of meeting a real princess, tugged on her grandmother's coat again. "Gran, does this mean they're not going to be king and queen anymore?" Her grandmother, struggling to process what she was hearing, could only say, "I think so, darling. I think that's exactly what it means." Behind the security barriers, police officers trained to handle royal events found themselves in uncharted territory. They had protocols for managing crowds during routine royal appearances, but nothing in their training had prepared them for managing public reaction to the voluntary abdication of a monarch. Chief Inspector David Wells spoke quietly into his radio, requesting additional backup units as a precautionary measure. The international media section had transformed into a frenzy of activity as reporters realized they were witnessing one of the biggest royal stories in modern history. Satellite trucks were already racing toward Buckingham Palace. News directors in New York, Sydney, and Tokyo were clearing their entire programming schedules. The BBC interrupted regular programming to provide live coverage of what was quickly being called the Great Abdication. But William and Kate seemed oblivious to the chaos they were creating. They stood together with a calmness that suggested they had found peace with their decision long before they shared it with the world. "We know this will be difficult for many of you to understand," William said. "The idea of walking away from everything we were born and trained to do goes against every tradition our family has maintained for over 1,000 years. But traditions," Kate added, "should serve people, not the other way around. And the tradition of sacrificing personal happiness for public duty has cost our family too much over the years. We refuse to pass that legacy on to our children." Dr. Helena Morrison, a constitutional historian from Oxford University who had been invited to provide expert commentary for the BBC, found herself frantically revising everything she thought she knew about the modern monarchy. In her 30 years of studying royal history, she had never encountered a precedent for what was happening before her eyes. The last British monarch to abdicate had been Edward VIII in 1936, and his abdication had been forced by a constitutional crisis over his desire to marry a divorced American woman. This was completely different. William and Kate weren't being forced out by scandal or political pressure. They were choosing to leave at the height of their popularity, at the moment when the monarchy should have been most secure. As Dr. Morrison watched the couple at the podium, she realized that what she was witnessing might be the most revolutionary moment in British constitutional history since the English Civil War. This wasn't just a personal decision. It was a fundamental challenge to the entire concept of hereditary monarchy. "Our children will grow up as private citizens," Kate announced, her voice filled with something that sounded remarkably like relief. "They will have the freedom to choose their own paths, to make their own mistakes, to find their own ways of making a difference in the world. They will know that they matter not because of their titles, but because of who they choose to be." The crowd was beginning to react more audibly now. Some people were crying, others were calling out questions, still others were applauding. The careful British reserve that usually characterized royal events was giving way to genuine human emotion as people processed the magnitude of what they were hearing. William looked directly into the television cameras, knowing that his words would reach millions of people around the world. We want to thank everyone who has supported us over the years. Your love and encouragement have meant more to us than you can possibly know. But we also want you to know that the greatest gift you can give us now is your understanding that love must come first. We will continue to live in England, Kate said. We will continue to support the causes we care about. We will continue to be public figures in many ways. But we will do all of this as private citizens, as a family that chooses its own path rather than following one predetermined by birthright. In the press section, royal correspondent James Mitchell was already formulating the lead paragraph for what would undoubtedly be the biggest story of his career. In an unprecedented move that will reshape the British monarchy forever, King William V and Queen Catherine announced their abdication today, choosing personal happiness over royal duty in a decision that has stunned the world. But, even as James wrote, part of him wondered if stunned was the right word. Watching William and Kate at the podium, seeing the genuine joy and relief on their faces, he found himself thinking that maybe inspired might be more accurate. Here were two people who had everything the world thought it wanted: power, wealth, status, adoration. And they were walking away from it all for something even more valuable. The security detail was growing increasingly nervous as the crowd's energy intensified. People were pressing closer to the barriers, not with threatening intent, but with the kind of urgency that comes from witnessing history. Chief Inspector Wells made the decision to extend the security perimeter, but he also noted in his report that the crowd's mood remained largely positive despite the shocking nature of the announcement. "We know that some of you will be disappointed in our decision," William continued. "We know that we are breaking with centuries of tradition and expectation. But we hope that in time, you will see that what we are doing is not a rejection of service, but a redefinition of it." Kate smiled at the crowd with a warmth that seemed to reach every person present. "We want to show our children and your children that it's possible to live authentically, to choose love over fear, to build a life based on personal values rather than external expectations. If that's not a form of public service, then we don't know what is." The implications of their announcement were still sinking in for most of the crowd, but the authenticity of their emotion was undeniable. After years of careful royal performances, William and Kate were finally being themselves in public, and the effect was electrifying. As they prepared for the final portion of their historic announcement, both of them seemed to stand a little taller, smile a little brighter, breathe a little easier. They had spent years carrying the weight of the crown, and now, in the space of a 20-minute speech, they were setting it down forever. The world would never be the same. But, more importantly, neither would they. As William and Kate approached the final moments of their announcement, the atmosphere around them had completely transformed. What had begun as a routine royal engagement had become something unprecedented, a moment when two of the most watched people in the world chose to strip away every pretense and reveal their authentic selves. "Before we conclude," Williams said, his voice carrying a new note of anticipation, "we want to share with you the decision we made about our future. Because while we are stepping away from our roles as king and queen, we are not stepping away from each other or from the work that matters to us." Kate moved closer to the microphone, and, for the first time since they had begun speaking, she looked nervous. But it was the kind of nervousness that comes with excitement rather than fear, the flutter of someone about to share wonderful news. 3 months ago, William and I started a foundation," she announced. "Not a royal foundation with all the protocols and restrictions that come with official charitable work, but a private foundation focused on one simple mission: helping other couples and families navigate the pressure of living in the public eye." The crowd leaned forward collectively, sensing that they were about to learn something even more surprising than the abdication itself. "We realized that we weren't the only ones struggling with these issues," William continued. "Athletes, entertainers, politicians, business leaders. There are thousands of families around the world trying to maintain authentic relationships while living under constant scrutiny. We want to use our experience, both our mistakes and our victories, to help others find their way." In the press section, Sarah Henderson felt her journalist instincts kicking into overdrive. This wasn't just a story about abdication. This was a story about reinvention. William and Kate weren't just walking away from their royal roles. They were transforming their experience into something that could help others. The foundation will be based here in London, Kate explained, but it will work with families around the world. We'll provide counseling, support groups, educational resources, and advocacy for privacy rights. We want to help people understand that fame and public service don't have to cost you your family or your authentic self. Dr. Helena Morrison, still frantically taking notes for her BBC commentary, realized that what William and Kate were describing was potentially more revolutionary than their abdication. They were turning their royal platform into something entirely new, a form of public service that had never existed before. We'll be working with therapists, relationship counselors, legal experts, and other families who have faced similar challenges, Williams said. Our goal is to create a support network for people who are trying to do important work in the world without losing themselves in the process. The crowd's reaction was shifting again. The initial shock was giving way to something that looked remarkably like admiration. Here were two people who weren't just complaining about their problems. They were turning their problems into solutions for others. Emma Thompson looked up at her grandmother again. Gran, are they saying they want to help other people like them? Yes, darling. I think that's exactly what they're saying. That's nice, Emma said simply, and somehow her 8-year-old assessment captured what many adults were struggling to articulate. Chief Inspector Wells noticed that the crowd's energy was stabilizing. The initial chaos of reaction was settling into something more like thoughtful processing. People were still pressed against the barriers, but they weren't pushing or shoving. They seemed to be genuinely listening, genuinely considering what they were hearing. In the VIP section, Prime Minister Morrison was beginning to see the political genius of what William and Kate had done. By announcing their abdication alongside their new mission, they had reframed the entire conversation. This wasn't a story about royal failure. It was a story about innovation and service redefined. We know that stepping away from traditional royal duties will disappoint many people, Kate acknowledged. But we hope that what we're stepping toward will inspire even more. We want to show that public service doesn't require royal titles, that making a difference doesn't require living in palaces, that leadership can come from authenticity rather than authority. Archbishop Michael Lawson found himself reconsidering his initial horror at what he had been witnessing. As a man of faith, he had always believed that true service came from the heart rather than from obligation. Perhaps what William and Kate were doing was actually a deeper expression of their values rather than an abandonment of them. The international media presence had swelled dramatically as news organizations around the world scrambled to cover the story. Satellite trucks lined the streets surrounding the event site. Helicopters circled overhead. Social media was exploding with reactions, analysis, and speculation about what the abdication would mean for the future of the British monarchy. But at the center of all the chaos, William and Kate remained calm, focused, present. They had spent months preparing for this moment, and it showed in their composure and clarity. Our children have been part of this decision from the beginning, William said, addressing what he knew would be one of the public's primary concerns. George, Charlotte, and Louis understand that we are choosing a different path for our family. They're excited about the opportunity to grow up with more freedom and less pressure. Kate smiled as she talked about their children. They'll still receive excellent educations and have wonderful opportunities. But they'll have those things because of who they are as individuals, not because of titles they inherited. They'll learn to earn respect rather than expecting it, to make a difference rather than simply representing tradition. The crowd was listening with an intensity that surprised everyone, including the speakers themselves. Royal events typically maintained a certain formal distance between the royals and their audience, but this felt more like a conversation than a speech. We want to be clear about one thing, Williams said, his voice taking on a note of firm conviction. This decision is not a criticism of those who choose to serve in traditional ways. My father will make an excellent king when his time comes. The monarchy will continue to play an important role in British life. We simply believe that there are many ways to serve, and we're choosing one that allows us to remain true to ourselves and our marriage. In the crowd, Margaret Davidson, the retired teacher from Yorkshire, wiped tears from her eyes. She realized that what she was feeling wasn't disappointment, but pride. She had watched these two young people grow up in the public eye, and now she was watching them make one of the most courageous decisions she had ever witnessed. The foundation will officially launch next month, Kate announced. Our first project will be a retreat center for public figures and their families, a place where people can step away from the spotlight and focus on what really matters. We're calling it Haven House. Dr. Morrison realized that she was witnessing the birth of an entirely new model of public service. Traditional royal duties involved representing institutions and maintaining traditions. What William and Kate were describing was more active, more innovative, more directly helpful to real people facing real problems. We've also partnered with several universities to research the psychological effects of fame and public scrutiny on family relationships, William added. We want to understand these challenges better so we can help people navigate them more successfully than we initially did. The scope of what they had planned was becoming clear, and it was impressive. This wasn't a couple running away from responsibility. This was a couple taking responsibility in a completely new way. In closing, Kate said, her voice carrying a note of finality, we want to thank everyone who has supported us over the years. Your love has sustained us through difficult times and made our happy times even brighter. We hope that our decision today will ultimately serve you better than continuing in roles that were slowly erasing who we really are. William put his arm around Kate's shoulders in a gesture that would have been impossible during a traditional royal engagement, but felt perfectly natural in this moment. We're not saying goodbye, he said to the crowd, to the cameras, to the world that had watched their entire adult lives unfold. We're saying hello to a new kind of service, a new way of making a difference, and a new chapter in our story together. The crowd erupted in applause that started slowly but built to something that sounded less like polite royal approval and more like genuine celebration. People were cheering not just for what William and Kate had announced, but for the courage it had taken to announce it. As the applause continued, Kate looked out at the thousands of faces before them and realized that they had done it. They had told their truth, shared their decision, and laid out their vision for the future. The hardest part was over. But as she squeezed William's hand and prepared for what would be their final royal walkabout, she knew that the most important part was just beginning. They were about to discover what life looked like when you chose love over duty, authenticity over tradition, and hope over fear. The applause was still echoing across the London streets as they prepared to step down from the podium and into their new lives. In a few minutes, they would greet the crowd one last time as King and Queen. After that, they would simply be William and Kate, and somehow, that felt like the greatest title they could ever hold. The applause gradually subsided as William and Kate stepped down from the podium to greet the crowd. But this wasn't the carefully choreographed royal walkabout that everyone expected. Instead of the usual protocol where selected individuals were chosen to meet the royals, William and Kate walked directly to where 8-year-old Emma Thompson stood with her grandmother at the front of the barriers. "Hello, Emma," Kate said, somehow knowing the little girl's name without being told. "I can see you've been waiting here for a long time." Emma's eyes went wide. She had practiced her curtsy dozens of times, but now, faced with her idol, she simply forgot everything except how to smile. "Your Majesty," Emma whispered, then looked confused. "Are you still Your Majesty?" Kate knelt down to Emma's eye level, her formal royal composure replaced by the warmth of a mother talking to a child. "Today I'm still Your Majesty," Kate said gently. "But tomorrow, you can just call me Kate. Would you like that?" Emma nodded eagerly, then asked with the directness that only children possess, "Are you sad that you won't be queen anymore?" The question hung in the air, and, for a moment, the hundreds of people within earshot held their breath. It was the question everyone wanted to ask, but didn't dare. Kate smiled, and her answer came from a place of such genuine peace that it surprised even her. "No, sweetheart. I'm not sad. I'm excited. Being queen was an honor, but being myself is going to be even better." Emma's grandmother, Margaret Davidson, found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "Will you be happy?" Kate looked up at the older woman, recognizing in her face the concern of someone who had invested emotionally in their fairy tale for years. "We're going to try very hard to be happy," Kate said. "And we're going to help other people try to be happy too." William had moved to another section of the crowd where a young father was holding his toddler son. The man looked conflicted, as if he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure if it was appropriate. "Go ahead," William encouraged. "Whatever you're thinking, I'd like to hear it." The man started, then tried again. "My wife and we've been struggling. The pressure of work, of trying to be perfect parents, of social media, of everyone having opinions about everything we do. It's been really hard on our marriage." William nodded with understanding that came from lived experience. "It is hard. The pressure to be perfect can destroy the very things you're trying to protect. Do you think your foundation really could help people like us? The man asked. Regular people, not famous people. Especially people like you, William said firmly. Fame makes the pressure more intense, but it doesn't make it more real. Every family dealing with external expectations, every couple trying to maintain their connection while managing public scrutiny of any kind. That's exactly who we want to help. The toddler in the man's arms reached toward William, and, without hesitation, William gently took the child's small hand. What's his name? William asked. James. James Robert. Hello, James Robert, William said softly. Your daddy is very brave for asking for help. That's going to make things better for your family. As William and Kate continued their walkabout, something remarkable was happening. The formal distance that usually characterized royal events was completely absent. People were sharing personal stories, asking genuine questions, expressing real emotions. It was as if the couple's radical honesty had given everyone permission to be authentic. Dr. Helena Morrison, watching from her position with the media, realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in royal history. They're not representing the institution anymore, she murmured to her BBC colleagues. They're just being human beings, and somehow that's more powerful than any crown. Chief Inspector Wells was documenting the most unusual royal event of his career. Instead of the typical security concerns about crowd control, his biggest challenge was managing the media surge and the growing number of people who had heard about the announcement and were trying to reach the location. In the VIP section, Prime Minister Morrison was already fielding urgent calls from Parliament and international allies trying to understand the implications of what had just happened. But, as he watched William and Kate interact with the crowd, he found himself thinking that maybe the implications weren't as chaotic as they initially seemed. They're not destroying the monarchy, he said quietly to his aide. They're just choosing not to be part of it. That's completely different. Archbishop Lawson had spent the last hour reconsidering everything he thought he knew about duty, service, and faith. As he watched Kate comfort a crying woman who had shared her own struggles with public judgment, he realized that what he was witnessing was perhaps the most Christian thing he had ever seen from a member of the royal family. The spontaneous walkabout continued for nearly an hour, far longer than any official royal engagement. William and Kate seemed reluctant to leave, as if they were savoring their final moments of being accessible to the people who had supported them for so many years. Finally, Lady Margaret Ashford approached discreetly to remind them that they had promised to return to the palace for the formal meetings that would be required to process their abdication. The constitutional machinery would need to be set in motion, Parliament would need to be officially notified, and arrangements would need to be made for the transfer of royal duties. But, before they left, William and Kate wanted to address the crowd one final time. Thank you, William said, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered thousands, for giving us the most wonderful final royal engagement we could have imagined. Your support, your questions, your honesty, your willingness to share your own stories with us. This is what we will remember when we think about our time as king and queen. Kate added, we hope that what happened here today will encourage all of you to be brave enough to choose authenticity in your own lives. You don't need royal titles to make a difference. You don't need crowns to lead. You just need the courage to be yourselves and to put love first. As they walked back toward their car, the crowd began to sing spontaneously. It wasn't God Save the King or any other royal anthem. Instead, someone started singing All You Need Is Love by the Beatles, and the song spread through the crowd until thousands of voices were singing together. William and Kate stopped walking and turned back to listen. Both of them had tears in their eyes as they heard their people singing about love conquering all, about love being the answer, about love being enough. When the song ended, the couple waved one final time, not the formal royal wave they had perfected over years of training, but the enthusiastic, genuine wave of two people saying goodbye to friends. As their car pulled away from the curb, Kate looked back at the crowd still gathered behind the barriers. Many people were crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, tears of inspiration, tears of hope. Do you think we did the right thing? She asked William as London blurred past their windows. William took her hand, the same hand that had worn a royal wedding ring, that had waved from palace balconies, that had cut ribbons and signed official documents, and performed 1,000 royal gestures. Look at us, he said simply. We're holding hands in the back of a car without worrying about photographers. We just spent an hour talking to real people about real problems without following a script. We told the truth about our marriage and our future without consulting a committee of advisors. Kate smiled as she realized what he meant. For the first time in 13 years, William continued, we feel like ourselves. If that's not the right thing, I don't know what is. The car turned toward Buckingham Palace, where constitutional experts and government officials and palace staff were waiting to begin the complex process of unwinding a monarchy. There would be papers to sign, procedures to follow, protocols for transferring power to the next in line. But, as William and Kate rode through the London streets, they weren't thinking about protocols or procedures. They were thinking about their children, who would now grow up with the freedom to choose their own paths. They were thinking about their foundation, which would help other families navigate the pressures they had finally learned to overcome. They were thinking about their marriage, which had survived the weight of a crown and emerged stronger than ever. Most of all, they were thinking about the future, not the future they had inherited, but the future they were choosing to create. Behind them, the crowd was slowly dispersing, but the conversations sparked by their announcement would continue for years to come. Social media was exploding with discussions about duty versus happiness, tradition versus authenticity, service versus self-sacrifice. But in the quiet of their car, away from the cameras and crowds and commentary, William and Kate had already found their answer. They had chosen love, and love had set them free. 3 months later, Haven House opened its doors to its first group of families struggling with life in the public eye. 6 months after that, the Foundation's research program published its first study on the psychological effects of fame on children. A year later, when reporters asked Kate if she missed being queen, she would smile and say, I was queen for 1 week. I've been myself for my whole life. I know which one I prefer. And William, when asked if he regretted giving up the crown, would simply say, I didn't give up a crown. I chose love. That's not a trade, that's a triumph. The fairy tale had ended, but the love story was just beginning. In the end, that made all the difference.